Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jerusalem Connection special report programming. Today, we've interrupted our regular cycle of releases this week because of the horrific events happening in Israel that started last weekend. We have with us today Jordanna McMillan from the Israel Allies Foundation. She's going to share with us some insights. We also have joining us today Shelley Neese, the Jerusalem Connection president, as we wanted to make sure that you all were getting as much information as possible and understand that we are working hard to bring that information to you. Jordanna, thank you for coming with us today on this journey to analyze what's going on. Maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about the Israel Allies Foundation, for which you are the U.S. director, and then we can go from there to look at what's been happening.
Great. Thanks for having me. The Israel Allies Foundation began in another really difficult time in Israel's history. I was thinking about that this morning, how back in 2004, I'm sure y'all remember back when we still read newspapers, you would open up a newspaper and, well, you didn't even have to open it. On the front page was, another bus bombing in Israel, another terrorist attack in a pizza parlor, just these horrific stories of a daughter and her father sharing, a meal together right before she got married, and both of them were killed by terrorists. So it was another time in Israel's history where Israel was feeling isolated because it was dragging on. The Palestinian Intifada, lasted for years, and they never knew where a terrorist was going to strike next. And during that time, there was a real reduction, obviously, in the number of tourists going to Israel. Israel's tourism industry, which is still very important today, was extremely important then. And just nobody was going except for evangelical Christians. There was this great outpouring of support from evangelicals all over the world, really. And the founder of our organization, Rabbi Benny Alon, he was the minister of tourism at the time. And he said he was the only minister of tourism who knew each of his tourists by name.
Wow.
Because he would go, and not literally, but he would go and he would meet with the buses, of tourists coming in, because there were so few. And it was really, I remember I went in 2004, and it wasn't just a trip to Israel, to the Holy Land, the land of the Bible. It was a solidarity mission. And Israelis were like, thank you for being here, to feel that support in this really long, drawn out conflict. So in 2004, the Israeli government, was so moved by that support that they felt the need to establish what was called the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus. That's within the Israeli parliament. And the purpose of that caucus was just to reach out to Christian leaders, Christian legislators of faith around the world, to encourage their support for Israel and build, relationships with them. And because of their outreach in 2006, 2 years later, a bipartisan caucus was established within the U.S. House of Representatives. It was the first pro-Israel bipartisan caucus. And its job was just to send that support back to Israel. And because of that caucus, that kind of group within the U.S. Congress, we now have 53 caucuses total in nations all over the world. So there's been an explosion of support, you could say, in Eastern Europe, especially all over Africa. Latin America has seen, tremendous growth. We just launched our latest caucus in Latin America in Paraguay, and the new president of Paraguay was at that launch and spoke about his commitment to moving the Paraguayan embassy to Jerusalem. So the foundation was really born just to kind of coordinate the work of these caucuses, in the sense of really giving the legislators the tools that they needed to educate them and to empower them to stand for Israel in moments, like this, especially.
So the establishment of the Israel Allies Foundation and the particular caucuses that have been formed in nations around the world, this is the time that they can be very effective. So can you share with us, from your vantage point, what you're seeing from that worldwide reaction? What news are you getting regarding the lawmakers in various nations that stand in solidarity with Israel and then the outcome of that in this crisis.
For sure. I mean, we're seeing, I woke up Saturday morning and saw that my phone had sort of, exploded with this horrific, terrible news. And within an hour, I had a call from Capitol Hill from a Democrat congressman's office saying, we want to put out a, bipartisan statement of support from the caucus. Let's do this, and over the course of the afternoon, our 4 co-chairs got together and put out a statement, right away in support of Israel's right to defend itself against this horrific attack. And then later in the week, our co-chairs, Brad Sherman, who's a Democrat out of California, Congressman Brad Sherman and Congressman Chris Smith were on Fox and Friends, as these, showing this bipartisan united front as the co-chairs of the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus. And Representative Chris Smith said some very powerful words likening this to a genocide. Just really kind of hitting home the atrocities that Hamas has committed. And I think it's really important, as leaders of this country, that their voices are out there in this kind of united front to show that Israel is not just a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. It's an American issue. And then, so that would be, within the United States. And then we also saw, of course, President Biden, his speech of support for Israel, which I think was just so important to Israelis. We have Secretary of State Blinken, who is in Israel right now, and who also, spoke so movingly that he, comes not just as Secretary of State, but as a Jew. And you could just see, the impact that this was having on him. I think also, from an international standpoint, in addition to the U.S. response, we had, the heads of our co-chairs down in Latin America, in the opposition government of Venezuela. There's a, Israel-Venezuela, Israel Allies Caucus there, which is very exciting. Within the opposition government, they put out a statement. Guatemala, a longtime friend of Israel, they immediately put out a statement of support. And then moving over, across the continent to Europe, they also started issuing statements, the chairs of our caucuses there. And just this morning, we released a joint statement from the heads of we had, I think, upwards of 20 of our co-chairs sign on to it, from Australia to Europe, Latin America, and Africa, just expressing their support for Israel's right to defend itself in this very much ongoing war.
I saw the interview with the chairman on Fox, and I did think, it came up so much richer and more thoughtful than other interviews, because these aren't Congress people that had to educate themselves on the history of Hamas or Israel's relationship with its neighbors right before the interview, or right at the moment of crisis. Like, these are people that have a really deep and long-lasting relationship with Israel and know its history and its struggles. And that really comes through when, because there has been a united front and united response to what happened, but you also want people who can talk about it with depth and with history and with knowing, like you said, how this goes back to the Intifada in terms of what we're seeing, and that there's a long thread that connects all of these events. And we've really reached a culminating moment, but that is helpful because you want more than just talking points. You want people who really know what they're saying and can date it back. And, when my husband and I lived in Israel, my parents and friends were always so afraid because we were there during the Intifada. And I would always say, like, don't worry, we're in Israel South. Most of the terrorist incidents were happening in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and Haifa, like in the important cities, and where the populations were denser and the sites were more famous. And so nothing was happening in Beersheba or Israel South. And so it's just almost from that moment on, once Israel got out of Gaza, the fight has moved to Israel South since then. And so to see these kibbutzim and these other places that are really united, beautiful towns. I don't even think it's something that people were used to seeing on the television, that some people are learning about these places for the first time, their existence outside of maybe hearing of Beersheba and Ashkelon. But
I think
they're really beautiful places.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a coastal area, right? Gaza has prime real estate on the Mediterranean, and you see, I think if anyone had heard, they may have familiar for sure with Sderot, which has, maintained so much rocket fire over the years. I remember back in, 2014, taking a bipartisan trip of congressmen, and we went and saw, the Iron Dome battery, and we went to the police station, which I feel like is the one that has probably been destroyed at this point in Sderot, and seeing the, leftover, the remains of the rockets, which they had there. And then, standing on a hill and just feeling, seeing Gaza and just feeling, how close it is. It's just really horrific. What's happened. These are kibbutzes, these are families, raising their kids and just living in peace. They had absolutely nothing to do with, we were talking a bit before about civilians and the differences, in the death tolls, and how the 1,300 Israelis, over 1,000 Israelis that have been murdered at this point are civilians. They're, we're talking about children here, babies who just have unspeakable things done to them. Yeah, it's an unprecedented time in Israel's history, unless we look back at the Holocaust, of course.
Well, and that's an interesting thing we need to consider. I was in Sderot in 2008, I believe it was, and I remember coming back to the States and trying to explain to people, think about the neighborhood or the street you live on, and then think of looking, from a room on the second story across the land or the hill at the end of the neighborhood, and imagine that other neighborhood, those roofs that you can see, somebody was shooting at you or your children. It's really hard to imagine how compact everything is, how close everything is. And we need to remember that it's not across the pond, which many Americans are just used to fighting someplace else. And with that, we have to think about this momentum of support is going to begin to be eroded, I'm sure, by the mainstream press. And that is why it's so important that elected leaders are well-versed in the entire history and have a solid ground, not just a momentum of tweeting support because it's the popular thing to do this week. So Jordanna, can you tell us what we all can be doing to make sure that this support is maintained? Clearly, you have the commitment of the members of the caucuses around the world, but what can citizens do to encourage that support in their elected officials and at home with their friends and neighbors?
For sure. And I think you just touched on something really important there, that I think it's a two-pronged approach, right? Of talking to your friends and neighbors about this. I've had a lot of conversations with people who just, it's removed, right? It's happening over there, and they don't really, understand the impact. And I think educating yourself, getting your news from a variety of sources. Israel has some excellent newspapers that are, try very hard to be very balanced, from the Times of Israel, the Jerusalem Post. There's a number of online resources, Fox News, CNN, just going to many different sources and collating and discerning for yourself, and staying informed so that you can have those conversations with your neighbors and, with your friends and family when things come up, and you can, know how to defend Israel. Watching your podcast would be would be a great start. Y'all do such an incredible job. But then, from a, political perspective, is just while you're staying informed on the issues, checking on your own congressman. Many congressmen, they release statements right away. They're on their websites. You can go to your congressman's website and find them. But the pattern that we've seen in the past is, Hamas will attack, Israel will respond. People use words like cycle of violence as if it's going in a circle, when really there's a starting point, and that starting point is Hamas. And then Israel responds with a right to defend its civilians. These rockets are, I'm sure they hope they hit, military installations, but they're not fired primarily at the military. They're fired at civilians. So the Israel Defense Forces are doing, what they were formed to do, defend the people and the nation of Israel. And it's not just, the Jewish citizens of Israel, of course. I mean, a rocket landed in Bethlehem the other day. Another one landed in Abu Ghosh, which is, very much an Arab neighborhood outside Jerusalem. I was just reading the story last night of a Muslim paramedic or a doctor who volunteered his time, with an Israeli, or has worked with a Israeli kind of EMT group, and he was targeted. They didn't know that he was Arab, and so they shot him in the chest, and then came up and proceeded to interrogate him to make sure he was really Arab and he was really a Muslim. And then he, witnessed this firefight of exchange, and before they left him, shot him point blank in the leg. And then the Israeli military, rescued him, and thank God, now he's recovering. But so this whole idea that it's, they're targeting everybody, within Israel, and Israel is defending all of its citizens. So I think just, staying informed in what's going on and making sure that there's a continuum of support. And if you see that your congressman or, the president or whoever it may be, there are ways to go online, to write your congressman, to call your congressional office a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, however long it takes Israel to deal with this issue, because it's not just a matter of, what's happened in the past. They go in, they'll take out some Hamas military targets. They try very, very hard to ensure that civilians are not part of that, it's baffling if you look at Israel's history of, engagement with Gaza. Everyone, the most basic military idea is like, the element of surprise. Israel will drop leaflets in the area that they're going to, target, and be like, if you're a civilian, get out of here. They will call the cell phones, please leave the area. They have their people, and are you sure that the area is clear? Are you sure that there's not a school? They go out of their way, more than any military I know, to ensure civilian life, to try as hard as they can, to just take out these terrorists. And in this war now, they can't just go back. There's no going back to the status quo of just taking out a few targets and leaving it there. I think they are preparing for a significant incursion into Gaza, and Israel is going to need continued support of the world, saying that, like, yes, you can't just, this has crossed a line.
Right.
So that continued support, I think, is key. And that this isn't just another headline that, grabs the news for a few days and then we move on to the next thing. But that we stay engaged, as difficult as it is to see the images and the stories coming out of Israel, in a very small way. When we do, we are sharing in their grief. And I think one of the most powerful things we can do is continue to pray, to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, to pray for God's, almighty, protection over the Jewish people. There's been so many stories in Israel's history of miraculous, protection of God, from Egyptian tanks, sinking into the sand in different wars, to, seeing angelic beings. I mean, Israel, as we know, the hand of God is on Israel, and I believe that they will prevail. Because as the scripture tells us, he neither slumbers nor sleeps. And so I think there's a lot of inspirational prayer in the Psalms right now, David talked a lot about vanquishing the enemy. And I feel that, sometimes when we don't have the words and to know what to pray, we can turn to the Psalms. I've been praying Psalm 20, specifically, that that the God of Jacob is with them, that he will sustain them, and he'll go before them. So I think prayer is key too, while we're acting on a political front as Americans, as whoever's watching from around the world, not just in America, but you can go to your representatives or to your president or whoever the governing body, and share your voice, not be silent.
Very good. Very good. And yeah, we know this is going to be a little bit larger of an operation. In the past, when these incursions happened with terrorists, Israel would call their responses, Operation this or Operation that. The name of this operation is actually Iron Sword or Swords of Iron, but it is not designated as an operation anymore. It is an actual war. It's a declaration of war. So the goal, from what I'm hearing from the generals that I get briefed with in the morning, the goal is to not just dismantle Hamas or disable it for now. It's to remove it completely. And maybe that means a power vacuum, that something better could come in, and that's going to take some endurance by not just the Israeli people but the world, to make sure. It's like cutting out a cancer from somebody's body. Your body takes a big hit in order to remove that cancer so that it can come back stronger. So we got to keep that in mind, that it's not going to be the 4-6 weeks or so that we're kind of used to. It's probably going to be much longer, and that's why we have to make sure the support doesn't languish and the counter narrative doesn't take hold, which we've seen. Many cities have seen the counter narrative start straight away, and you can comment on that if you want, Jordanna. But
Sure. I was going to say, while you saw this strong reaction and stand from from President Biden and from Congress, at the same time, you saw this absolutely abhorrent "we stand with Hamas" message coming at, just disgustingly anti-Semitic message coming out of U.S. universities. And thankfully alumni and people are like, excuse us, you're not going to condemn this, you're going to allow this message of hatred. I would challenge these people who stand with Hamas to go to Gaza. I mean, not literally, but Hamas,
maybe they should.
I'm like, do you realize what Israel is dealing with here? This ISIS style, attack that they've done, beheading children. I mean, Hamas is not only bad for Israel, it's bad for the Palestinian people.
And it's been bad for the Palestinian people. That's why they're suffering so much. People keep blaming Israel, and it's not. If they had better leaders,
for sure.
Maybe they wouldn't be.
billions of dollars have been poured into helping the Palestinians. How much of that money has actually gone to help the Palestinians in humanitarian ways is a mystery at this point, because most of it, I would argue to say 100%, 90% of it within Gaza went to reinforce tunnels, to tunnel into Israel and kill civilians, for concrete, for rockets. I mean, you name it, it's not gone to the people themselves. So Hamas is not just a scourge for Israel, for its own people. From the time it was democratically elected in Gaza, which was the last election that was held in Gaza, there hasn't been one since, they very quickly, tortured Fatah, their own, enemy within, or other, party within Gaza. So it's not just against Israel here.
Yeah, the greatest thing that can happen for the Palestinian people who want to have lives and families and prosperity is for Israel to do what it needs to do, and some legitimate, actual peace-loving leadership bubbles up or emerges. But that we'll have to wait and see how that pans out.
And I think that's part of the prayer action too, is praying for the people of Gaza, the women of Gaza, who we never hear from, that if we're praying for a miracle, I welcome it from all accounts, for these 150 hostages that they have there. If it takes Gazan women to sound an alarm, if it takes the US military to help, because there's American hostages too, whatever that form that miracle needs to take, that we're just praying for that miracle. And Jordanna, I love when you let your charismatic show. I'm praying the Psalms as well. It's all I really can do at this moment in time. Right. And it is super alarming. Amy and I are already getting messages from people saying, well, there's two sides to every story. I mean, once the fog of the weekend has lifted a little bit, those anti-Israel narratives are so deeply ingrained and so instinctual, as we saw in part of some of these UC Berkeley and Harvard and these campuses, that it's just there and it's willing to come out, even if it defies all logic. So yeah. Our role in defending Israel, even if it seems like the most logical and humane thing to do, is still necessary and real, because the instinct to just be anti-Israel under any situation is still there. But also, I wanted to say, for all of us that have friends in Israel, I've been getting a lot of messages just asking if I knew any of the victims, and I don't, but what we all know, and even just emailing friends in Israel and getting responses back, is that I don't know anyone in Israel that doesn't have a brother, son, son-in-law, father-in-law that's fighting in the war right now. That piece of it and the fight, I mean, the man who baptized my children in the Jordan River is fighting on the southern front right now. That every Israeli is affected in that way. So even if they weren't personally connected to one of the victims of Hamas's terror campaign, everyone is connected to the fight. And so praying for the IDF, that is also in the Psalms,
Yes. I mean, I think that's
those who defend Israel.
That's key what you said, Shelley, because, we look at the numbers of, the sadness of how many have died. But if you, this weekend, it was reported, or earlier this week, that it's, 130, Israel's 134th its population, the size of America. So if you, did the math there, that's around 27,000 Americans, it's probably up to 30,000 Americans, the, proportions at this point. And you're right. Like, it affects absolutely everyone. We sat and we saw the horror of 9/11, but, thankfully I didn't know anyone personally that died at 9/11. I knew people who had, someone, or who were there in New York, friends in New York, who witnessed the, the atrocity of that. But, for someone, say, living in New Mexico, it was a little, it's a bit removed. It's a little far away. Israel, as you mentioned earlier, Amy, how compact everything is. Israel does not have that luxury. They don't have the luxury of an ocean between them and their sworn enemies that are, dedicated to wiping them off the face of the earth. That is the goal of Hamas. The goal of Hamas is not to live side by side once they get a certain amount of land. Right. And nobody believes them. It's shocking to me. They state, this is our goal, to wipe the Jewish people off the map. And their big brother Iran, they chant at the same time that Hamas and Iran are saying death to Israel, and the next breath it's death to America. Israel is the little Satan, we're the great Satan. So for every American, watching this incredible podcast that y'all do, we're the ultimate goal. So, we can't sit here and say, oh, this is sad, this is Israel's problem. Well, it doesn't affect me. It affects, every peace-loving, liberty-loving, freedom-loving person around the world, to not just sit back and do nothing. Now is the time to make a stand. You're right. Every Israeli I have a friend whose 21-year-old daughter is a commander in the IDF, and she's fighting. Women in uniform have died at this point. I can't imagine as a father, I can't imagine as a mother, sending my son out to fight and not knowing minute by minute if they are dead or alive. And for the people who are sitting at home in Israel and they don't know what's happened to their wife or their children. I mean, what do the women and children of Israel have to do with Hamas's so-called, resistance? That child, absolutely nothing. This is about pure, unadulterated, demonic hatred for the Jewish people. So, when those world leaders stand up in a few days and they start equivocating, that this is like some kind of military operation against another military, it is just absolute rubbish, to say the least.
Well, Jordanna, with that, do you have any final directives? Shelley, do you have any other questions that maybe we were missing in our engrossment in Jordanna's wise words?
No, after Jordanna said that, I thought we need to, interview someone connected with the UN next.
Well, yeah, my friend who works with the UN, we already have a tentative call.
There's a whole lot to say in that category as well.
I find it ironic that, just, I want to say last week, Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, was standing up protesting,
and got escorted out. Yeah, he got escorted out.
And he was speaking out for, women who had been murdered in Iran by the regime. And he was the one exactly that was escorted out. And now here Israel's dealing with, what they are dealing with. So
yeah, we are going to keep a thumb hold on what's going on in the UN. We have some personal contacts that are intimate with those activities, and we will have that report probably up in the next week or two as we track what's going on there. It's very important that we keep our network as exposed to as much information, truthful information as possible, so that they can act in every way, starting with prayer, praying the Psalms if you're with a lack of words. Shelley, I have been praying since those first images of the little boy that was sort of being bullied in Gaza. My heart was just pouring out that the women in Gaza, that some divine spark of humanity can bubble up. They're very oppressed, the women in Gaza. They don't have any power, but maybe they could just take those Israeli children and just right there in the moment protect them from being bullied and otherwise abused, and give them sustenance until they are rescued. The women are a key factor in Gaza, and if the Palestinians got rid of Israel tomorrow and Hamas and the PA were to take over and rule everything, the women of the Palestinian people would be in no better of a situation. So
for sure. I mean, there's when you said that, it reminded me of something. There's actually tomorrow here in DC, there's a prayer vigil that's been organized by the American Muslim and Multi-Faith Women's Empowerment Council. They are hosting a prayer vigil to stand in solidarity with the Israeli victims who were brutally attacked by Hamas outside the White House. So
that's good to know. It's good to see sort of the interfaith and the cross-faith common ground. And I mean, certainly Christians, evangelical Christians, and a wide breadth of Christians who are Zionists. But indeed, I think the Muslim community has a plethora of clear-thinking individuals who are not part of or supportive of terrorist organizations, and we welcome their activities in supporting this goal to eradicate the evil. It's not about politics anymore. We've gone way past that. This is about good and evil.
Yeah, it is. It is a fight of good and evil, and now is the time to respond and not to stay silent.
Jordanna, how do people find your foundation? Like, where do they follow you?
They can follow us on Twitter at Israel Allies. We're on Facebook, Israel Allies Foundation, and our website's really a great resource, israelallies.org.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you Jordanna, for all the hard work you're doing. I know you're working probably 24 hours a day on top of taking care of your family. But we'll pray for you and your fortitude going forward. And we invite you back to update us when there's something important to relay.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Shavua Tov.
Me too.